Welcome, everyone. My name is Reverend Irene Monroe, and I'm honored to be this evening's MC to welcome you all to the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence fifth annual Peace MVP Awards fundraiser. Tonight, we will honor and acknowledge the ministry of Chaplain Clementina Cherry, who is the founder, president, and CEO of the Lewis D. Brown Peace Institute. Because of COVID-19, we're all living a life of one Zoom meeting after another. So I thank you for Zooming in this evening to an event that invites you all to be part of stemming gun violence in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. You are here tonight because we're asking for your support and contributions. You are an integral part of the success, and we need you as much as you need us to address the epidemic of gun violence that plagues our cities and takes the lives of so many of our citizens in suburbs, in the rural areas, and certainly in the city. So with no further ado, I would like to introduce to you the board chair, Janet Goldenberg.
Thank you, Reverend Irene. As Reverend Irene said, my name is Janet Goldenberg, and I have the very great honor and privilege to be the president of the board of directors of the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence. On behalf of our board of directors and our newly formed community council, I want to welcome everyone joining us tonight, whether this is your first Peace MVPs or your fifth. Tonight, in addition to honoring the remarkable Chaplain Clementina Cherry, we're raising funds to hire a community organizer to help ensure that the communities most impacted by gun violence have a voice in crafting the solutions. We know these are difficult times, but gun violence has increased 30% in Boston since the pandemic began, and mental health issues and domestic violence have been exacerbated as well, making our mission more critical than ever. Well, with your help and your generosity, we can do something about this. We appreciate what you've done so far, and we hope you'll be inspired by our remarkable speakers to contribute again before the end of the evening, so we can amplify our efforts to save lives by hiring an organizer and providing them with the tools and resources they'll need to be successful. And now, before we move on with our program, I want to acknowledge the elected officials joining us tonight, including Senator Rebecca Rausch, Representative Denise Garlick, Representative Marjorie Decker, Presumptive Representative Ted Phillips, and Maya Rayner from Senator Sonia Chang Diaz's office. Thanks so much to the board of directors, the community council, and the members of our wonderful Peace MVP Awards Committee, led by Jen Muroff and joined by Brianna Butterworth and Molly Malloy. Thanks so much to our executive director, Ruth Zacharin, who you'll hear from later on this evening, and to our communications specialist, Emily Popke. Without all of them, this evening would not be possible. And of course, enormous and heartfelt thanks to our MC for the evening, Reverend Irene Monroe, to our featured speaker, Boston Globe columnist and associate editor, Renee Graham, and to our honoree, Chaplain Clementina Cherry. We are so thrilled to be honoring Chaplain Cherry tonight. But first, I want to take a minute and reflect on the transformative journey the coalition has been on these nearly last 8 years, since a handful of us gathered around a table in early 2013, determined to join forces to somehow tackle this epidemic of gun violence. For our first 5 years, we had no full-time staff at all. And some of you who were here with us for our last Peace MVP Awards in the spring of 2019 might remember that that night we were raising funds that we could hire our first ever executive director. I'm delighted to say we did that, and she's wonderful, and you're going to hear from her later on tonight. I think it's essential as an organization for us to take stock periodically and reflect back on where we've been before we decide what comes next. The coalition has accomplished a lot and come a long way, helping to do meaningful education, reaching out to support communities. We've also evolved as an organization. We're now a 501c3 and have a much more inclusive leadership structure, with both a new entity, a community council, and a reconstituted board of directors that includes some folks who were with us from the start as well as some remarkable new voices who have been in this fight a long time and who we are beyond excited to have join us. You got a sneak peek in the beginning slides with some of those people were, but I hope you'll join us for our quarterly meeting on Thursday, October 22nd at 7 p.m. to meet them. We'll be joined that night by some members of the Black and Latino Legislative Caucus to talk about what's next for the legislature on some key priorities. And on a personal note, I cannot tell you what it means to me that so many of you stuck with us and supported us and believed in us through this journey by sending emails, making phone calls, showing up at rallies and hearings and lobby days, supporting member events, participating in focus groups to strengthen the coalition itself, and yes, by providing the financial support we needed to make any of this work possible. You know, as I said, we started as a small group of loosely organized but very determined volunteers, many of whom, and I certainly include myself in this, didn't really have any idea what we were in for or up against. But we're now a 501c3 with over 100 member organizations, 2 full-time paid staff, admittedly underpaid, but paid, and a remarkable new board and community council and numerous successes under our belt. It's a testament to what Margaret Mead said so many years ago. Never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world, because it's the only thing that ever has. And the world needs a whole lot of changing right now. And as I reflect back on the origins of the coalition, it feels particularly meaningful and appropriate to be honoring Chaplain Cherry tonight. Folks will have a lot more to say about her remarkable work a little later on, but I want to speak from a more personal perspective. I first met Chaplain Cherry as the coalition was just forming, when she joined some of our early meetings to provide guidance and perspective, and as she invited us to join her for learning at the Peace Institute. What I was most struck by and what I remember was her warmth and generosity of spirit. She imparted her deep wisdom both with her words and by example, and welcomed with love and open arms and without judgment all who came to learn. Meeting her and having an opportunity to learn from her was and is a gift I will always treasure. So thank you, Chaplain Cherry, from the bottom of my heart for all you have done and continue to do to make this a better, safer, and more loving world for all of us. And now let's move on with the next part of the evening. I am so excited to unveil for all of you the worldwide debut of the first ever video highlighting the work of the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence. And it features a few of the voices from our new community council and board. So many of you with us here tonight were a huge part of making this journey possible. I hope in watching this short video, you'll share my pride in all we've accomplished together and my enthusiasm and determination for what more we can and must do. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I hope you enjoy the video and the evening.
Every year, nearly 40,000 Americans die from gun violence, deaths that are preventable. Since March of 2013, the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence has worked to do just that, to end this epidemic plaguing our communities. By bringing together impacted communities, advocates, public health experts, and decision makers, we work to create a nation where every one of us, in every zip code, lives free of the threat of gun violence. Gun violence is a complex issue. The coalition meets that complexity with a multi-layered approach that includes education, advocacy, community organizing, and member support. We educate the public about many forms of gun violence, interpersonal violence, firearm suicide, and unintentional shooting, all grounded in a model of public health. Our leaders speak across Massachusetts and other states, reaching people in churches, temples, schools, community centers, and on virtual platforms to educate the public about the trauma of gun violence and how to make our communities safer. We affect change through legislative advocacy. Our efforts fuel the passage of the 2014 Massachusetts gun bill, ensuring that Massachusetts continued to lead the nation in gun safety legislation. We helped pass the Extreme Risk Protection Order Law to provide families with breathing room to get the help when a loved one is in distress. We know that gun violence is a public health issue, too often driven by economic and racial inequity. We work to address the root causes of violence. We advocate for funding that supports employment training and job opportunity for youth, that provides trauma response, that invests in community-based violence intervention. Our work includes showing up publicly and consistently for our over 100 member organizations to support their efforts to address gun violence. It includes community organizing, helping to ensure that the communities most impacted by gun violence have a direct role in creating the solutions.
I was really moved and compelled to get involved with the Massachusetts Coalition for the Prevention of Gun Violence because of my work in responding and working with residents to recover from, to heal from the trauma caused by the exposure to community violence. And if that's all that we do, just respond, we will have failed, and I think failed miserably. We have to do the healing work, but we also really have to be involved in prevention. It won't be enough for us to reduce gun violence in the city of Boston. It won't be enough for us to reduce gun violence in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It has to happen across the nation. It is preventable, but we will only prevent it if we work together.
One of the efforts that I bring to the coalition is my experience in working to reduce gun suicide. Households that have guns are 4 times more likely to have a suicide event than households without guns. That is an opportunity that we can work together to reduce that tragedy, which is increasing around the country. When I first got involved in gun violence prevention, at a meeting I used the term gun control, and a friend of mine said, please don't use that term. Please use the term gun safety. Because when we use the term gun safety, we're reframing the whole issue as a public health crisis, which indeed it is.
I've been working around gun violence prevention as an organizer since the age of 13, 14 years old. And so that is very meaningful because of the community that I come from. And I know that the Massachusetts Coalition is always there to make sure that people are getting the resources they need around gun violence prevention work, and so that we can keep our communities safe and harmless. Some of the resources they have is with other networks and connections to organizations that have been doing the work. It's the drive and the hope and the liberation that we want to see for our generation and for the generations beyond that keeps us striving and going on.
Massachusetts has a unique potential to lead the nation in putting an end to gun violence. With world-class research institutions, open-minded citizens, and elected officials willing to base decisions in sound public policy, we can bring the conversation about gun violence prevention to an entirely new level, one that is grounded in public health, equity, and safety. But it won't be easy. To succeed requires bringing everyone together: activists, public officials, community-based programs, researchers, faith leaders, medical providers, and concerned citizens. This is what we do. Together with your help, we will enact forward-looking legislation. We will build a groundswell of support for community violence prevention. We will demand policies grounded in data and research. We will not give up. We will not be discouraged. Together, we will create a world where all of our children, where all of us live free from gun violence. Join us.
Please welcome now Executive Director Ruth Zacharin.
Thank you so much, Reverend Irene. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ruth Zacharin, and I am honored and humbled to serve as the inaugural Executive Director of the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence. I am so grateful to be with all of you tonight as we honor the lives touched by the trauma of gun violence, celebrate the work of activists and change makers, and dream together about a world that is safer for us all. I have been with the Coalition for almost a year and a half now, and it has been a time of learning, growth, and change. It feels important and meaningful to note that on my first day with the Coalition, I marched in the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute Mother's Day Walk for Peace alongside Chaplain Clementina Cherry and the Louis D. Brown family. She has been a part of my Coalition journey literally from day one, and as a founding member of the Coalition, she has been an integral part of our collective journey as well. I'm thrilled to be honoring her and her powerful work tonight. I also want to note that Representative David Linsky has joined us this evening as well. First, I want to reflect for a few moments on some of my history and how that informs the way I think about gun violence prevention and my role with the Coalition. As many of you know, for over 20 years, my work was with survivors of domestic and sexual violence. As an advocate and trauma clinician, I worked with way too many women and men who had been shot at, or threatened with a gun. In too many cases, those incidents happened in the presence of their children, who were also terrified and traumatized by the presence of that gun in their home. For the many years that I worked in Brockton, our program also served children who had lost a parent to a domestic violence homicide. Ultimately, I think it is that experience that brought me to want to make broader change, to figure out what we could do to better prevent this violence from happening at all. I have a very vivid memory of sitting with two young children immediately after their mom was shot and killed by a rageful ex-partner. In trying to help them understand what had happened to their mom, which was heartbreaking, I remember thinking, we have to change this narrative. These children shouldn't have to live like this. Their mom didn't have to die like this. None of us should have to live like this. Ever since then, the idea of changing the narrative has been grounding for me, because for too many people, their narrative has been profoundly impacted by guns. Our work at the Coalition is also grounded in changing the narrative, in this case, the narrative of gun violence in Massachusetts. The funds that we are raising this evening will help us do just that. Your contributions will enable us to create a position that will focus on violence prevention in cities across the Commonwealth. To give you some perspective on what that work will look like, I share the following excerpt from our new mission statement, which was drafted after several months of focus groups with over 200 total participants. We hold legislators, decision makers, and systems accountable for keeping the residents of Massachusetts safe from gun violence. We ensure that our advocacy efforts are informed and led by survivors, impacted communities, and our member organizations. We engage in detailed policy analysis, advocating for legislative and budget priorities that address root causes of violence and anti-racist system change. Historically, our advocacy has been focused on the State House, as we have worked with legislators to promote bills and programs that will reduce rates of violence in the Commonwealth. But it is time to take that work to a more local level. Our goal is to hire a community organizer who will focus on the communities that have experienced the highest rates of gun violence. The organizer will work with youth, community members, and organizations like the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute to support a collective vision of what their communities most need to prevent violence and ensure that vision is heard by municipal leaders. Whether it be in Boston, Brockton, New Bedford, or Springfield, we will stand alongside community members as they agitate for change with their local leaders. We believe that violence prevention policies, programs, and funding should be driven by the communities most impacted. This position will help us ensure that the will and wisdom of the community is brought directly to those in leadership positions who hold power and purse strings and have the ability to make lasting policy change. And as of this evening, we are inching ever closer to our goal of making this position a reality. But now I want to come back to why we are honoring Chaplain Cherry, because she too has been changing the narrative on homicide, interpersonal violence, the impact on communities, and what a just response to trauma looks like. Because as noted on the Louis D. Brown website, all families impacted by murder deserve to be treated with dignity and compassion, regardless of the circumstances. She has touched the lives of countless families in the aftermath of profound trauma, and the impact of her work of healing is immeasurable. As someone who has done trauma response for most of my adult life, I know that you cannot underestimate the importance of immediate and compassionate responses to a traumatic event. Those initial responses can very often directly impact the trajectory of someone's healing. For over 25 years, Chaplain Cherry and the LDB team have been doing just that, surrounding families affected by violence with compassion, love, and support. She has created a place of healing, of hope, and of collective dreams for a world without violence. She has also had a profound impact on the narrative of the coalition. She has pushed us to see our work to be not just about the guns themselves, but about the overall trauma of gun violence. She has taught us the importance of centering the experiences of survivors in our advocacy work. She has partnered with us, challenged us, and supported us in our own growth and development as an organization. Tonight's event honoring her is just one small way we can demonstrate our gratitude for the deep and lasting impact she has had on who we are and how we think about the work of gun violence prevention. Our coalition narrative is richer and stronger because of her. I am grateful to Chaplain Cherry, and I am also grateful to all of you who are with us tonight. Our evening is being guided by the steady hand of Reverend Irene Monroe and enlightened by the wisdom of Renee Graham, and I thank both of them. I am grateful for our staff and interns, Emily, Kenya, and Annabelle, all of whom bring their own wisdom, talent, and experiences to our work. I am thankful for the volunteer steering committee that gave birth to this thing we call the coalition and guided it through its early formative years. Without their relentless work, none of this would have been possible. I am so excited about our newly formed board of directors and community council as they will lead us powerfully into our next stages of growth and development. I feel so lucky to work in coalition with our over 100 member organizations, because when I talk about we at the coalition, they are the ones that make up that we, and we are strong. And I thank each and every one of you who have joined us tonight, because we have come together in community to honor the lives impacted, but also to recommit to the work of ending gun violence. I find comfort in knowing that with all of you, we will work towards ending gun violence for all people in all communities. My comfort comes from knowing that together, we will build a world that is safer, healthier, and more just for us all. And I turn it back to Reverend Irene.
Thank you, Ruth. Now I am proud to have the honor to introduce this year's Peace MVP awardee, Chaplain Clementina Cherry. Now, many of us know her as Tina. Chaplain Cherry not only talks the talk, but she walks it too, and invites us to do it with her annually with the annual Mother's Day Walk for Peace. Her tireless spirit is amazing, and this year with COVID, the annual Mother's Day Walk took place, making it the 24th year. Chaplain Cherry is the founder, president, and CEO of the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute. The Institute is a center of healing, teaching, and learning for families and communities impacted by murder, trauma, grief, and loss. Cherry founded the Peace Institute in 1994 in Boston, Massachusetts, after the murder of her 15-year-old son, Louis. For more than 25 years, Cherry has used her experience as a survivor to serve families impacted by murder. She has advocated for survivors of violent crimes and has developed best practices for homicide response. Cherry holds honorary doctorate degrees from Regis College, Mount Ida College, and the College of Holy Cross. Cherry was born in Honduras and raised in Dorchester, Massachusetts, where she currently lives. Her proudest accomplishment is being a mother to Louis, Alexandria, and Alan, and her grandmother to Alexander. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pride and honor to present to you Chaplain Clementina Cherry.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the board members of the Mass Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence, for the team. Say, the more I'm recognized, the more work I get. Yet, I am honored to really be receiving this award from the Mass Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence. And as I heard, Ruth, you speaking, and again, I had to stop and I had to pause in remembering the journey. Since 1994, when Louis was killed, it was the issue of gun violence. And for me, the only time I saw the value of bringing us together is really more of, again, of looking at the victim, the person shot, and the narrative that came after that. And so to see the coalition, you're becoming just a little bit more diverse than when I first started. When I first got a call from Angus McQuilkin in Senator Jake's office to really work to make sure that Massachusetts really focus on gun violence and really creating laws that would impact communities, and especially communities of people who look like me. And so here we are. For me, it's 26 years later, still here, still working. Gun violence hasn't stopped for us. Even though we focus on the reduction of victims, and every year we start at the beginning, we are one less than last year. For us, is we want to make sure that people are aware that for each victim of gun violence, the survivors rate has just went up. So the numbers continue to increase. So I want to accept this award. I always accept awards with mixed emotions, because then what happens, I have to stop and think back, why am I doing this work? Because my son was murdered. And within my community, there are no winners. We are impacted on both sides of the guns. So anything that I can do to guide, to support, to offer whatever technical assistance, whatever words I can offer the coalition to move forward, I'm open to that. So humbly, I accept this award. And we know it's not about me. It is not about me. Tonight, it's about the coalition. Tonight is about celebrating the work of the coalition. And it's also about raising funds. So let's just put it out there. They need to hire an outreach coordinator. And I think I heard Janet said, what, $4,000? So we know that this can happen before tonight is over. So I really want to share with you just a little bit about what the mission is of the Mass Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence. To create a world where all of us can live free from trauma of gun violence in all forms. That's community-based violence, police-involved killing, or weaponized hate. In the coalition, there's room for you, for anybody who wants to get involved. If you are ready to have difficult conversations, this is not a black and white issue. This is not good or bad. This is not about blaming or shaming. It's about creating a world where all of us can live free from trauma. And that includes those of us whose loved ones are being killed day to day. Even during this pandemic, homicide is on the rise. Suicide is on the rise. So the issue of gun violence has not lessened. We don't put as much focus and attention on it, but yet it has not lessened. So just again, celebrating this evening, celebrating the coalition, celebrating its members. And you know when something's good. When something is good and it lasts, that means now we have to hire somebody to do the work because everybody's busy. And so hiring Ruth as the executive director is one sure way of the coalition fulfilling not only its mission, but its vision, its goals, and its objectives. And now to hire an outreach coordinator is another part of that. Because even though there's a board members, there's the advisory committee, everybody also has their primary roles. And they've got to be committed to their primary roles. So being here this evening, celebrating the wonderful work of the coalition, it's also celebrating the work of each of its members. A coalition is just a coalition in name. What makes the coalition strong is its members, where each of its members bring amazing wealth, amazing resources, amazing programs to really fulfill what's happening and to show that we are a community of assets and not a community of deficits. So as your 2020 Peace Award recipients, I want to celebrate that because for us at the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, it is about peace. Peace is our message, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year. We know the violence is happening. That's not what we want to promote. So congratulations to the coalition so that we can keep going, working together to end gun violence. There is room for all of us. But as we move forward, I would not be me if I didn't invite you, the members, the viewers, the participants, to continue to look at who we are. And I'm going to say now, one, as an immigrant woman, two, as a woman of color. Resources don't come that easily to us. And what I want to invite you or ask you to do as we continue to move forth, as we close this year, beginning another year, whenever there's a homicide, whenever there's a gun violence, really create this message, this unified message where all of us, all of the members can sign on to, yet another family impacted by gun violence, whether it's the victim's family or the shooter's family. Within my community, within any community, we are all impacted and there are no winners. Second, we are still here to offer. You're doing work, you're advocating, you're rallying, you're filing legislation, you're doing a lot of the out of work. Healing needs to happen. And the Peace Institute is here to continue to serve as your partner for whatever way you want us to begin to heal. We have the tools. We have the tools. And that's a part that we want to make sure the members of the coalition know that the tools are here. And last, You don't have to do the work, but homicides are happening across our state. This is not a Black issue. And all families deserve to be treated with dignity and compassion, regardless of the circumstances. So there is one gift that I want to offer the members of this coalition, the Survivors Burial and Resource Guide. It's a step-by-step workbook that all of the hospitals have, and that we also want to equip the members of the coalition, that when a homicide happens in whatever part of the community that you are from, that you are equipped to make sure the families get this guide so that they can bury their loved ones with dignity and compassion. And then they will be better equipped to then come and join the coalition to add our passion and to add our voice. So again, thank you, thank you, thank you to the members for this amazing honor. Again, it is bittersweet. And at the same time, know that the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute is committed to this journey. We are not going anywhere. So again, thank you so much and congratulations.
Thank you, Chaplain Cherry. Now I'm delighted to introduce our keynote speaker, Renee Graham. Renee Graham is an opinion columnist and associate editor for the Boston Globe. She writes on a variety of subjects, including white supremacy and systemic racism, domestic violence, LGBTQ issues, police misconduct, gun control, and politics. She's a regular contributor to WBUR FM's Radio Boston and GBH TV's Basic Black. In 2017, Graham received the Persistence Award from Progressive Massachusetts for columns promoting racial justice. In 2018, she was awarded the Philip Pine Medical Association's Community Heroism Award for promoting understanding of the homelessness situation in the city of Boston and championing the underserved. Last year, Graham was selected as one of the 25th most influential LGBTQ plus people of color in Greater Boston by Get Connected and Bay Windows. I am proud to present to you Renee Graham.
Thank you, Reverend Irene, for that lovely and really humbling introduction. And also my deepest appreciation to the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence for inviting me to be part of this event. When the many, many books are written about this wretched year, these months that will leave scars, seen and unseen, 1 week in particular is likely to garner a lot of attention and analysis. That's because 4 significant events occurred in the final week of May. Amy Cooper, a white woman, called police to falsely report that Christian Cooper, a Black man and birdwatcher in New York Central Park, was threatening her. In fact, she was the one breaking the law by having her dog off leash. And she then tried to use her privilege in an attempt to punish him for pointing that out. That was May 25th. On the same day, although the world would not hear of it until a bystander's video went viral, George Floyd was asphyxiated under the knee of a Minneapolis police officer. That sparked months of nationwide protest, among the largest seen in decades, against white supremacy, systemic racism, and police violence. Just a few days later, the COVID-19 pandemic surpassed a dreadful and once unthinkable milestone. More than 100,000 people dead in about 3 months. Now that's 3 events, yet it's unlikely you heard anything about the 4th. It certainly didn't make national news when it occurred on May 26th. In fact, it didn't even make the local paper in Nevada where it happened until mid-September rather. Samantha Arjun died, becoming the 60th victim of what was already the worst mass shooting in modern American history, the Las Vegas concert massacre. She died from complications of the gunshot wounds inflicted on her 3 years ago this month. In 2017, that mass shooting monopolized the news for weeks. And again, there were heated conversations about the need for heightened gun reform. And so many thought that this would be the one that changes everything. Yet other than a ban on bump stocks, nothing more happened between the shooting and Arjun's recent death. Actually, let me correct that. This happened. Tens of thousands of people in this country died from gun violence, nearly 40,000 in 2017 alone. Whether in mass shootings that make headlines or the murders, suicides, and accidents that shatter families and upend communities, every day across this country, gun violence remains a dire and pressing issue that our leaders seem to have lost the will to tackle or even talk about. This has been especially apparent this year, even though we're in the final weeks of what is often and rightly called the most important election in our lifetime. Yet neither of the presidential nominees has made gun violence a focus of their campaigns. We've had 2 debates. Well, to be honest, we had one sort of debate, if you're really into the amplified lies of a corrupt administration, and one which, to be honest, I have no idea what to call the first meeting of the presidential nominees. In any case, there was not a single discussion or question about gun violence. It has not been a topic in speeches, except when the president yelps at a rally or tweets about protecting the Second Amendment. Gun violence is not at the top of anyone's mind. One might think the problem had ceased to exist while we were busy hoarding toilet paper and hand sanitizer. That shows just how much gun violence in America has become normalized. When people ask if we've become tuned out to the many hundreds of COVID deaths every day, or if we're numb to more than 211,000 people dead from a disease the vast majority of us never heard of when this year began, you can look to the normalization of gun violence as a guide to how that can happen. If too many Americans excel at one thing, it's ignoring the obvious, and that includes the atrocities happening in front of us. I come to this issue with lived experience. When I was 8, my uncle Conrad, who was also my godfather, was murdered. He was only 39 years old and left behind a wife and a young daughter. I saw his face on the news and in the newspaper under the words, nightclub owner shot dead. It was the first time I saw my father cry. My grandmother could barely lift herself from her bed to attend his funeral. With time, we learned to walk and laugh again, but we never fully recovered. It was never again discussed, but it forever lived with us and within us. That is the trauma of too many people in this country. This is an especially perilous moment in our nation's history. As we move deeper into this uncertain fall, we are still facing a raging pandemic. There's high unemployment and the economy is faltering. There are major crises in housing and food insecurity, which may rival or surpass what was seen during the Great Depression. Climate change is altering where and how we live, and the devastating interruptions in education will be felt most sharply by the kids who can least afford it. Meanwhile, gun violence is shattering records this year. While other crimes decreased during the quarantine, shootings escalated. As Janet mentioned earlier, gun violence has spiked dramatically in Boston. The coronavirus pandemic, which has limited our mobility, has done nothing to abate the epidemic of guns in America. And as COVID-19 disproportionately affects communities of color, that is also the case with gun violence. So, where does that leave the anti-gun violence movement vying for time and attention? Voting, especially this year, is a way forward. Vote for the candidates, and not only in the presidential election, who not only say the right things, but have a record of doing the right things to curb gun violence. Make them live their promises. Make them earn your vote every day. On the issues that matter, never settle. But here's another important point. You cannot claim to care about ending gun violence unless you also care about social justice. You can't address the effect without first investigating and eradicating the cause and conditions that exacerbate this violence. Gun violence has often been called a public health issue, and while that is certainly accurate, it is also a matter of social justice. People should recognize that the George Floyd protests are not only about what Minneapolis police did to George Floyd. The ongoing protests are not only about Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, or Jacob Blake. The same systemic racism, the same failures of institutions designed to work for some and against others also impacts the prevalence of gun violence. When it is easier to buy a gun than fresh produce in your neighborhood, that's a social justice issue. When a murder in Charlestown receives more attention than a murder in Mattapan, that's a social justice issue. When solutions to gun violence are only discussed when children in suburban schools are targeted, but rarely when it's the children in Brockton, that is also a social justice issue. When an increase in suicides looks only at its impacts on white people, but ignores suicide rates in communities of color, that is a social justice issue. When few connections are made between domestic violence and gun violence, that is a social justice issue. When people fail to see, as Julian Castro pointed out during one of last year's Democratic debates, that police violence is gun violence, that is a social justice issue. To address the root causes of gun violence, you must view the root causes of the despair, disenfranchisement, and desperation that drives it. Of course, we also know this. In America, there are few substitutes for ardent grassroots activism. It was the abolitionists like Frederick Douglass who forced Lincoln's hand to write the Emancipation Proclamation. It was civil rights activists who marched on Washington and bled in Selma who compelled Lyndon Johnson to sign the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. It was gay, brown, Black, lesbian, trans people at a dive bar in New York's Greenwich Village who decided one hot summer night in 1969, they'd had their fill of police harassment and ushered in what is recognized as the modern LGBTQ rights movement. It was the men burying their friends and lovers who used their own last breaths to indict a system that was allowing them to die during the height of the AIDS crisis. It was they who forced the production and release of medications that saved and continue to save lives. Change rarely occurs from the top down. It is the activists, the protesters, the people in the streets who do the work, and when they're tired, still do more. It is the work often done when few are looking, work done without immediate reward or acclaim. To be an activist is to be ignored, to have doors slammed in your face, to have even loved ones say, enough already. To gun violence, we must all say enough. We are a nation facing unprecedented challenges. We live under the lengthening shadows of one pandemic, COVID-19, and two epidemics, systemic racism and gun violence. All pose an indelible threat. To ignore any of them is to do damage to the well-being of ourselves, our families, our neighbors. They must all be met with vigor and vision. What should be remembered is that the impossible cost of gun violence must be as high for the lawmakers who ignore it as it continues to be for those who are left to tend to the wounded and mourn their dead. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Ruth?
First, I want to say thank you to Renee Graham for sharing your words with us and also sharing your story with us. That was really powerful, and for reminding us of the ways that gun violence connects with issues of social justice, racial justice, and grounding us in the fact that change rarely occurs from the top down. It requires all of us to come together, and I thank you for that. My heart is filled with gratitude And even though we are all physically distant, I feel enveloped in community and bolstered by every single one of you that is with us tonight. On behalf of all of us at the Coalition, I extend deep and sincere thanks to Reverend Irene Monroe for narrating our new video, guiding us through this incredible evening, and providing us with words of inspiration. I extend our gratitude to Renee Graham for sharing her wise and powerful insights and calls to action. And I celebrate Chaplain Clementina Cherry. Chaplain Cherry once said to me, "I am the work and the work is me. There is no separation." So in honoring that, I will say that we celebrate all that you are and all that you do to bring peace to this world. We are so lucky to have been joined tonight by all of these amazing women. And to all of you who have also joined us this evening, thank you. I want to tell you what we together have accomplished tonight. For so many months now, I have dreamed a little dream about increasing our staffing capacity and expanding our work in deep and meaningful ways. I have talked with so many of you about what this community organizer position could look like and what impact it could have in advancing our mission to prevent gun violence in the Commonwealth. And tonight, we are at the precipice of realizing this goal. With your support this evening, we may be able to not just hire a community organizer, but also provide them with all the tools needed to be as successful and impactful as possible. Because of your support, I am poised to do the following tomorrow. Write a job posting for a full-time community organizer and compile a list of what technology, materials, and supplies the organizer will need to reach youth and communities most impacted by gun violence. With your help, we are making all of this happen. As we bring our 5th annual Peace MVP Awards to a close, allow me to express one more heartfelt thank you to everyone who had a role in building this coalition and allowing us to reach this moment. While the work may be hard, our strength is in the incredible community that surrounds us, because together we will create safer communities. Together, we will advocate for policies and programs that lessen trauma and promote peace. Together, we will ensure that all voices are heard, honored, and respected. Together, we will prevent gun violence. Thank you.